Morning campers, welcome back. My aircraft has been sat in the hangar, which is where I'm off to now, for the last 3 months, and it's not moved an inch. So before I do return it to flight, I need to do a little bit of maintenance. And this video is all about rubber. So if you've done an internet search today for rubber and you've stumbled across this video, I might not be what you were expecting, but stick around, you might find something useful. So, as I said in the intro, this aircraft has sat in this spot for the last 3 months and it's not moved. So, before I fly it, there's a few things I need to check. Number one, starting with the fuel. This fuel has been in this tank for 3 months. It would probably be okay. Do I want to risk it for the sake of draining it out? Probably not. So, this is going to go in the lawnmower. So, a few other things I'm going to do is basically anything that's made out of rubber, I'm going to check it. Rubber's obviously susceptible to going hard or brittle or cracking or petrifying. So essentially anything made out of rubber, I'm going to check it. So number one of the list of things to check is going to be the tyres, obviously. Making sure that they're not cracked or perished in any way and that they are inflated. Tread on these tyres isn't really so much of an issue. You don't spend a lot of time rolling on the tyres, aircraft tyres. So tread's never normally an issue, but you just need to make sure that they're not cracked. Another item made out of rubber that's always worth checking is your engine mounting rubbers. These things here, I'll do a bit of a close-up video. And the way to check these is pretty brutal actually. You actually need to get hold of your engine and give it a good twist and see if you can see any sort of cracks or anything like that in the engine rubbers. I did replace these engine rubbers last year, so I know that these are good. These are all right. Okay, another place where you'll find a bit of rubber on your engine is the in between the airbox and the carburettor. There's a rubber here. Now I have had one of these fail on me in the past. I'll show a picture of that. Basically it's split where it joins, and I actually discovered that when I was about 70 miles away from the airfield. So that caused a bit of an issue, but thankfully nothing a couple of cable ties couldn't fix. But prevention's better than cure, so have a look at that. Make sure that it's okay. I am going to replace this because this is getting old and it feels a bit hard, so I'm going to change it out. Other area that's worthy of attention is this, basically the stuff in between your fuel tank and your carburettor. So that includes your fuel line. Is it rubber? It's made out of something called Tygol, I think it's called. I'm not sure if it's a type of rubber compound. Doesn't necessarily crack, but it can go quite hard and feel a little bit brittle. So every so often, for the sake of a few quid, it's worth changing that. One item definitely worth a check, particularly at the end of every winter, is this thing here, which is your primer bulb. Essentially, in a nutshell, what that does is it's got a one-way valve in it, so when you squeeze it, it forces fuel up towards the carburettor. It doesn't let fuel go back down the other way. These are susceptible to perishing and cracking, and Ben at FlyLight certainly advocates that you should replace these every 12 months, so that's what I'm going to do for the sake of a few quid. If these do crack, what they can do is they can allow air to be sucked into your fuel line. Ultimately that can make your engine stop. How do I know that? Because I've had one engine failure and that's exactly what caused it. My primer bulb had a split in it, so I'm going to swap that out as well. The last item that I'm going to have a look at and probably change is in the carburettor. This is a diaphragm carburettor, and the diaphragm that's in the carburettor is another item that's made out of rubber. That can go quite hard and stiff and affect the operation of the carburettor, so I'm going to swap that out as well. The manual suggests that you do that every 12 months. Whether or not you actually need to, I guess, is open to debate. There is a school of thought that says if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I'm the sort of person that likes to do things by the book, so I'm going to swap that out as well. So I'm going to take this carburettor off, I'm going to take it to pieces, and I'm going to swap the diaphragm out, and I'll actually video that separately because I think that's quite interesting. Just whilst this fuel tank's draining, quick disclaimer as always, I'm not a mechanic, I'm not trained to do any of this. This is stuff that I've just picked up along the way in my years of owning this aircraft, and stuff that people have shown me. I probably do half of it wrong, if you do something that I do and break something, then it's not my fault. So just needed to say that. Right. I'll just stop this video here because I think it's worth pointing this out. This little hole here is quite important, and there's a corresponding hole on the gasket. Make sure you line these up and don't put them the wrong way around, because if you block that hole, then what will happen is you'll prime the engine, it'll start, it'll run for about 5 seconds and then it'll stop. Don't ask me how I know that. Yeah, so this is the pulse hole, and this is basically what makes the carburettor work. Pulse is positive and negative pressure from the engine gets sent through this hole into the carburettor. That's what makes the diaphragm move up and down, and that is what causes the pump action and sucks the fuel in. There you go. Every day's a school day. Another tip that I was given is you don't want any rubbish going in there, because that's going straight into your engine. So if you do take your carburettor off and you leave it off for any length of time, just make sure you plug that hole with anything, a rag or something, just to stop any dust and crap getting in there, because that will ultimately end up in your engine. So there you go, that's fine. Right, so I've got to a stage where everything that I'm going to replace, I've now taken off the aircraft, I've got it here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the comfort of my caravan where it's a bit warmer, and replace what I need to replace before refitting it back onto this aircraft. So I will see you in the caravan.
A few moments later.
I'm here in the caravan, nice and warm. I've got everything that I need laid out in front of me. So I've got a new Airbox mounting rubber, which has got the air filter attached to it, fuel tubing, a primer bulb, a fuel filter, and then for the carburettor I've got a carburettor diaphragm and gasket set, a new gasket, and some carb cleaner for making sure that everything's clean. What I'll do is I'll put links to all of these bits in the description below, so if you need any of this stuff you'll be able to see where you can get it from. Okay. Right, so I've got my old fuel line in front of me, and you can see what I was talking about when I was saying that this material can go hard. The ends of this fuel tubing, where it's attached, has gone quite hard. If you compare, well, you can't compare how that feels on a video, but you can see that that is quite hard and it's stuck in that shape. You compare it with the end of a new piece of fuel tube, which is completely flexible and pliable. So that's why I'm going to swap the fuel tubing out whilst I'm here. So just looking at the old fuel tube, what I can do is I can use these lengths of tube. You can see there's 3 separate lengths altogether. I can use those to measure the length of tubing that I need, so I make sure that I get the right amount. And then basically what I do is I just need to make a replica of this using these new parts. I'll just show you the part number on there so you can see it. You can pause the video if you want to have a look at what that is. Hopefully that'll show you that. Right. Now then, resisting all temptation to get mucky, which, as you know, if you watch my videos, I do have a habit of doing that. I've got some Vaseline here, which does help get the rubber onto these fittings. The Vaseline, petroleum jelly basically, so when any fuel does go through there, any of this stuff that gets in the fuel, it will dissolve. So, and if you did accidentally stumble upon this video because you'd done a search for rubber, this might float your boat. Right, here's a tip for you. If you struggle to get this fuel tubing onto this fitting, which clearly you can see I'm struggling, if you heat this up, it makes it even more flexible and pliable and expands it a little bit. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I might boil some water and just drop the ends of this in some boiling water. So back in a minute. Right, we're back. So I've had my fuel tube in here soaking in a bit of hot water for a few minutes. So let's see if I can now get this fuel tubing onto this fuel filter. Oh, certainly bloody hot. Right, let's give it a go. This is fiddly. If there is an easy way of doing this, then please feel free to drop me a comment and let me know if there is an easier way to do this. Well, that's got it started, so the hot water has definitely helped Right. Oh, it's going. That is on. Right, now for the primer bulb. Again, I'll put the parts number on there. You can get primer bulbs from Amazon, they're not expensive. I go for these Polini primer bulbs, and I don't know if they're any better than the cheap ones that you can get for a couple of quid off Amazon. But having had one of these fail on me in flight, I am a little bit sensitive, and these, if nothing else, I think these are just reassuringly expensive. They are good quality without a doubt, so these are the ones that I go for anyway. And again, I'll put the link in the description below. Now then, it's important that you get these the right way around. If you look on here, there is an arrow, and as I said earlier on when I was in the hangar, there is a one-way valve in here, so when you squeeze it, that arrow is telling you that when you squeeze it, fuel is going to go that way. What this won't allow is fuel to go that way. So you need to make sure that you put this the right way around. So that the fuel in this is going to be going that way. So I need to make sure that the arrow is pointing towards that fuel filter. Another point worth considering is the order that you put these round. I always put the primer bulb before the fuel filter. The reason for that is these do perish, these do degrade, and when they do, previously when I've changed these and I've emptied them out, there's been all sorts of manner of black bits of rubber inside these. You don't want that getting to the engine, so I always put these before the filter so that if any parts do come off this, the fuel filter will capture those bits and not let them get to the engine. So fuel filter comes after the primer bulb. Right, that is on. Just whilst that's my last bit of fuel tubing there is heating up in that hot water, another point that I guess is worth mentioning is that if your Microlight is an SSDR, you're required to keep a logbook for it, then any work like this that you do, you need to make sure you jot it down in your logbook to comply with the legislation. It's also helpful when it comes to looking at when you need to replace stuff. If you've got a record of it, then you know, for example, that your fuel filter was replaced at so many hours. Another tip with your fuel filter is you actually write the date on it. Write the date that you replace it, so that just by visually looking at it, you can see how old it is. You don't have to go searching through your logbook. Another little gem. Right, so that's me done. That is a new fuel line made up. Just checking I've got all my arrows pointing the right direction. So the fuel's going that way from the tank. So I've got my arrow there, that's pointing the right direction. There's an arrow on the fuel filter, that's going the right direction. So we're all good. One last thing to do is these fittings are fairly tight and fairly secure, but I wouldn't trust them. I certainly wouldn't leave them like that because over time, as I showed you, these ends do get hard and they expand. So the last thing you want is any air getting in any of these points. So what I always do is I always secure them. You can buy clips, Jubilee clips and cable ties and all. I've seen all sorts of manner of things used to secure these lines. But what I always do is I use lock wire, as you can see here. And it's pretty much a permanent fixing. To get these off, I would have to cut that off and take it off. But it is a permanent fixing, and it is absolutely airtight. There is no way any air is getting past those seals. So that's what I do anyway. So just take a where'd that go? Right, just whilst I've done this one, I'll just show you what I've done. So I've just locked wired this one. What I always do is I always put a bend on the end of it so that you don't snag your fingers on anything sharp, but just making sure that the end of the wire isn't going to put a hole in your fuel tubing. So that's what it looks like when it's done. Right, so that's my fuel line done. Next thing then to turn my attention to is the airbox and the rubber seal that connects the airbox to the carburettor. This is quite a simple fix really. It's just a case of pulling that out and replacing it with this one. Dead easy really, that. Okay, so there's the old air filter out, and one thing I have noticed is the new air filter. Let me take it out of the packet. The rubber looks the same, which is the main bit, but the actual filter itself, they've shortened it and made it a bit smaller. And what I do notice is that this rubber is rock hard, absolutely rock hard, whereas the new one is very, very soft. So again, it's a rubber bit. Over time it just goes hard and stiff. Steady. So just clean this up, pop this in, and we should be golden. A tip for you, something to check if you've got a Corsair engine, and something that caught me out, particularly if you've got this type of airbox, is inside this opening. I'll show you on the camera. Inside this opening, which is where this rubber part sits, when I first got this, inside here was really, really sharp. It had a really sharp burr on it. You could feel it. It was like a razor. And what happened is, over time, with this thing vibrating, it actually cut through the rubber on this airbox. And I'll show you a picture of what happened. I flew away to New Farm, which is down in Northampton. It's quite a good flyaway, quite a good distance away. When I landed, I noticed that my airbox was proper wobbling around, and it turned out that the rubber had split all the way around, which was caused by this really sharp edge. Thankfully, I managed to cobble it together with some cable ties and fly back. But if you've got a brand new Corsair engine, just take the airbox off, just run your finger around the inside there and feel for it. If it's sharp, which is probably left over from the manufacturing process, just take a file it down, and that hopefully should preserve your rubber. So refitting this is dead easy. Basically, you just need to make sure that the lip there, holding the airbox, sits into that ridge around the rubber. I'll tell you what else I've just noticed as well. These new air filters, there's a rubber O-ring around there. That never used to be on the old filters. Now with these old filters, I did notice that when this is in there, these things could rotate around quite freely, particularly once you've got a little bit of oil and fuel residue in here, in this groove. These air filters did spin round quite freely. They've now put a little rubber O-ring in there, which is interesting. Okay, so new air filter and mounting rubber fitted. That was an easy job. So that's ready to go back on. Okay, so that's my airbox done, fuel lines are done. Right, the next bit, which gets a little bit more involved, is the carburettor diaphragm replacement. So I've got the carburettor in front of me. All I've done so far is I've taken it off the aircraft. I've cleaned the outside of it using some Carb cleaner before I take it to pieces, so I don't get any rubbish inside. And I've got my Tryton carburettor gasket and diaphragm rebuild kit, which I will show you there. The part number's on there, and again I'll put a link in the description below showing you where I get it from. And also I've got a new gasket for when I put the carburettor back on the aircraft. The gasket that came off looked in very, very good condition, but for the sake of a couple of quid, I'm just going to throw a new gasket on there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two needles out of the carburettor. I've already taken a photograph of the relative position of these two. These two needles are pretty much set to the factory settings. The Corsair manual does give you a default position for these two needles, which I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll put it on the screen. And these two needles are set at that factory default position. So all I'm going to do is take them out. So on the end of these needles there is a washer, and there's also a rubber O-ring which sometimes gets stuck in the carburettor, so make sure you don't leave that behind and lose it. So that is the high needle. The washer. And the rubber ring. So there's two needles, a high and a low. They are not the same, they're not interchangeable. The way I remember it is the low needle, which is that one, is longer, L for long, that's how I remember it. Okay, so don't get those mixed up. Okay, so there's lots of bits to this carburettor, so what I'm going to do is, just as I take this to pieces, I'm just going to lay the stuff out from left to right. So the first thing you've got is a gasket, which I'm just going to pop right there. And then there is a little screen filter, which is your last defence of any crap getting into the carburettor. Right, so then I need to undo these series of screws that go all the way around. Right, so the next thing to come off is that bit which has got a little plastic bit underneath it, which is going to go on there. So I've got that. Let's get those out of the way. And then another gasket there. And that bit. And this bit here is the diaphragm, which is the reason that I need to do a little bit of maintenance. So this is made out of rubber. This is the diaphragm. I'm not going to go into detail about what this does and how it works, because if I'm brutally honest, I'm not entirely sure. But essentially this thing works as a pump, and this is what sucks the fuel through. And it's made out of rubber, so as most things, rubber, over time it can go hard and brittle. This actually doesn't feel too bad, but I've got this far, so I might as well replace it anyway. And then finally, one more gasket. There. There are some other parts in here I'm not going to mess about with, because the engine was running absolutely fine before I took this to pieces, so I know there is nothing wrong with it. I'm not going to go any further. What I am going to do, whilst I've got this in this stage, is I'm just going to use some carb cleaner, and I'm just going to blow through all of these holes just to make sure there's no grit, grime, dust or anything like that in there. When it comes to carburettors, one thing I've been told is that cleanliness is absolutely crucial. There's holes in here that are absolutely minuscule where the fuel goes, and if you get a speck of anything in there, it can clog it up, engine's not going to run. So off camera, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this outside and give it a good blast with carb cleaner. Okay, so my carburettor's in pieces. I've taken the main part outside, I've given it a good blast through, all the jets, all the fuel ways and all the rest of it, I've given it a good blast through with carb cleaner, so this is absolutely spotless. It's now a case of rebuilding the carburettor using the membrane and diaphragm gasket repair set and putting it back together. If I open this, I'll show you what you actually get. that's all of it. So I will be replacing that gasket. That's the wrong one. Let's do this the right way around, shall we? So that replaces that. I've got a new diaphragm, new one of those, and a new one of those. So if you've been methodical and laid all your stuff out, it's just a case of replacing it from that end to that end using new parts. So let's go. The good thing about this carburettor is it's got a couple of posts that poke out, which means that you can't get these gaskets on the wrong way around. If I try and put this on the wrong way around, it won't fit. That post there lines up, but it just will not line up. So you can't get these on the wrong way around. And again, with this diaphragm, it will only go on one way. See, it will not fit that way around. So this is idiot proof, which is a good job, because I'm an idiot. Okay, so that is on. Next, this one, then this one, and this bit. This really is quite satisfying doing this. Right, so these screws don't have to be done up dead tight. If you do them up too tight, this is only aluminium that they're screwing into, you run the risk of threading it, so they don't need to be tight. When you are tightening them up, little tip, as in a lot of things, if you are fastening something down that's got bolts going all the way around it, is to tighten them up in a pattern similar to that, so that you put an even stress on it, and it just ends up make sure it's nice and flat and you don't end up with a tight spot. Right, last part goes on the top. Needles in. So needles all the way in. I'll screw these out to the recommended factory settings, and then it's just a case of refitting all of this stuff back onto the aircraft, and then hopefully I'll be able to go flying. So I hope you found some of that useful. If you have, please feel free to give me a thumbs up. If you've not subscribed to the channel, it'd be great if you did. And hopefully I'll put all this back on the aircraft. It'll work perfectly, the weather will improve, and we can go and do some flying. So see you on the next one.